to trap those little buggers, but enough larger animals to feed them.
Hey everyone, have you ever had a show from when you were younger that you can't stop thinking about? Not because it was your favorite, but because it was just so different, you couldn't forget it. For us, and for a lot of people who were glued to their TVs in the mid-90s, that show was the Maxx. It was a cartoon that would come on late at night on MTV, and then, after just one season, it was gone. It just vanished, leaving us all with a ton of questions. So in this video, we hope to answer some of them. Let's begin. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
I warned him not to get too close.
Let's just drop it, okay?
The birth of a cult classic, the Maxx's MTV origins. The show first aired on April 8th, 1995, as part of their Oddities animation block. And I'm not kidding when I say this might be the most faithful comic-to-TV adaptation ever made. Seriously. You'd have to go back to those old 60s Marvel cartoons, which just trace the comic panels, to find anything this loyal. A lot of the art in the show was scanned directly from the comic book pages. This was all thanks to digital coloring and editing, which was still a new thing back then. And for the scenes that needed new art to make the story flow on screen, the comic's creator, Sam Keith, was right there in the studio a few days a week, drawing it himself. The pacing was perfect. Almost every single issue of the comic fits neatly into the cartoon's 11-minute runtime. That meant each episode of the show covered about 2 issues of the book. If an episode was running a little short, they'd just toss in a few extra Maxx stories from other comics to fill the time. Sometimes, they even created totally new material.
The only one who really cares for him is Julie Winters.
So what was it about the Maxx that just clicked with the vibe of 90s MTV? Well, Sam Keith himself described his comic as quirky, flawed, psychedelic, and just plain weird. And he wasn't wrong. The comic first dropped in March of 1993 as part of the second wave of titles from Image Comics. And funnily enough, it was the only comic from that entire wave to actually survive. See, the original Image founders were pretty ruthless about deadlines, and they ended up cutting most of the other books that came out around that time. But the Maxx kept going strong until 1998, pretty much only ending because Keith felt like he'd said all he needed to say with the series. But you can't talk about the Maxx without giving a massive shout out to the rest of the creative team. Bill Messner-Loebs wrote the dialogue, and Keith has always said he was the one who really helped shape the story. Honestly, the book just wasn't the same after he left. Then there's the inker, Jim Sinclair, who added so much of the comic's unique flavor. You know all those little hidden 8 balls you can find in the art? That was all him. And let's not forget the letterer, Michael Heisler, who designed a bunch of custom fonts that just perfectly fit the comic's one-of-a-kind look. The MTV show, however, never got that far. It only adapted up to about issue number 11. A second season was announced, but for reasons we still don't know, it never got made. This left anyone watching the show with a lot of unanswered questions. If you wanted to find out the truth about the tangled connection between Julie, Mr. Gone, and everyone else, you had to pick up the comic. It really seems like making the show influenced the comic's art. The early issues have crowded pages with tons of tiny, squiggly drawings. But a few issues in, you can see Keith starts drawing much bigger characters and using simpler page layouts, which were way easier for the animators to work with. Obviously, putting this on TV meant some things had to be changed. And the voice cast was incredible. Julie was voiced by Glynis Talkin, who you might know from a ton of video games and Star Wars audiobooks. And Mr. Gone was voiced by the legendary anime voice actor, Barry Stigler. Funnily enough, for some mysterious reason, he wasn't even credited for the role at the time.
Next stop, the aquarium. Oh, son of... It's the card.
The show, Surrealism, Trauma, and the Outback. Let's talk about how they made the cartoon version of the Maxx. It was pretty unique. Almost every single line you hear in the show was pulled word for word from the comic. You have our main character, the Maxx. He's a purple man in a skin-tight suit with a toothy mask and wrapped-up shoes. His middle fingers are like sharp claws he can fight with. But here's the twist. He wasn't really a vigilante. He was a homeless man struggling with severe mental illness. He slept in cardboard boxes, heard a constant pounding noise in his head, and only sometimes managed to stop a mugging, usually in a very messy way. On top of all that, the Maxx would sometimes just vanish and reappear in this alternate reality he thought was the Australian outback. This place was filled with fantasy creatures, including little eyeless piranha things that walked on 2 legs, called the Is. In the outback, the Maxx believed his one job was to protect a warrior princess he called the Leopard Queen. And this is where it all connects. The Leopard Queen looked exactly like a social worker he knew in the real world a woman named Julie Winters. Over time, Julie really became the main character of the whole story. Julie is cynical, she's wounded, and she's still trying to heal from a horrible assault that happened about a year before the series starts. Her life gets turned upside down when an evil sorcerer, Mr. Gone, shows up, and Mr. Gone somehow has an army of dark versions of the Is from the Maxx's Outback world. As the story unfolds, we find out the awful truth that Mr. Gone was the man who attacked Julie. His meddling with magic and his assault on her were so unrecoverable that it created the Outback. It was a fantasy world born from her pain, a place where she could escape and feel powerful as the Leopard Queen. The Maxx had tried to stop the attack while it was happening, and in the chaos, he got tangled up in her psychic world, becoming a confused, not so bright protector figure. So right from the very first episode, the Maxx made it clear this was not your average superhero show. It was asking some really tough questions, like how do women survive that kind of trauma, and what makes attackers think the way they do. It's a mature drama that just happens to be filled with all kinds of creatures and dreamy visuals. The animation style would even change all the time. One minute you'd have these beautiful hand-drawn landscapes, and the next it would be still images and very early, raw-looking CGI. But the creators never lost sight of the fact that a giant purple man in a mask looks pretty silly, and all this comic book magic is ridiculous when you put it right next to real-world crime. It lived in a strange middle ground between teenage superhero fantasies and deep feminist ideas about survival. Why it ended. Production limits and a rushed conclusion. The producers actually ran into a pretty big problem right away. See, the plan was to adapt one issue of the comic for each cartoon segment, but MTV was airing 2 new segments every single week. The comic, on the other hand, was only coming out once a month, and sometimes it was even late. You can see the math problem here, right? They were just consuming through the source material way too fast. To keep up, they had to adapt everything they could get their hands on. Stories from other comics the Maxx appeared in, a special mail-away issue, you name it. By the end, the cartoon was adapting comics that only had been on store shelves for a few months. And because they didn't know if they'd get a second season, they had to wrap up the show in a way that felt like an ending, even though it wasn't. The biggest mysteries of the comic, the real connection between Maxx, Julie, and Mr. Gone, hadn't even been revealed yet. The show couldn't spoil the comic's big secrets, which creator Sam Keith wouldn't spell out until months after the cartoon had finished airing. Now, if you're wondering what you missed by the show ending, the comic went to some confusing places. After finally resolving the main story, Sam Keith made a bold move. He jumped the story forward 10 years and shifted the focus to a new main character, Sarah, the angsty teenager from the first part of the series. And to kick off this new era, Keith brought in a special guest writer for issue number 21, the one and only, the legendary Alan Moore. And Alan Moore did what Alan Moore does best. He came in and flipped the whole table over. Moore has a history of doing this. With characters like Swamp Thing, he revealed that the hero wasn't a man who became a monster, but a monster that just thought it was a man. He loves to tell you that everything you thought you knew was a lie, and he brought that same energy to the Maxx, leaving Sam Keith with a bunch of crazy new ideas to work with. But let's get back to the show itself, because even after all these years, it's still one of the most unique and ambitious things ever put on TV. The show never makes fun of its characters for their struggles. It's dark, but it's also full of little glimmers of hope. It shows how different people cope with their pain in their own way, and how even someone as lost as the Maxx can still be a hero. But the best part? You can still watch the whole thing today. The entire series is available to stream on Amazon, or you can get the DVD, which has awesome commentary from the creators. The whole thing is only about an hour and a half long, but it tells a story so rich and complex that you'll want to watch it again and again. And you know, there was almost a movie. Back in 2019, Channing Tatum was attached to star in a live-action version of the Maxx. But sadly, the project got stuck in what they call development hell and never happened. Honestly, that's not a huge surprise. The Maxx is so much a product of its time. It has this very specific 90s Gen X vibe. But even today, we can always look back and just be amazed at what a strange and brilliant thing it was.
Me. Sucker.
Julie, wait.
The Maxx's legacy, cult status, and ongoing influence. The shows that get canceled turn into myths. It's a tale as old as time. That's exactly what happened with the Maxx. It was never going to be a huge mainstream hit, but it became a true cult classic. For years, knowing about the Maxx was like being in a secret club. It was a thing you had to hunt down on beat-up old tapes or grainy video files online. It kicked the door open for animation to get really deep and personal. When you see a show like BoJack Horseman that gets real about depression using unique visuals, or something like Amazon's Undone that mixes up animation styles to show a character's broken perspective. You're seeing the legacy of the Maxx. It paved the way, proving that cartoons could tell stories that were profound and, honestly, pretty painful. What's interesting is how the stuff it was talking about feels even more important today. We're all more open about mental health, and the Maxx feels less like a quirky 90s show and more like it was way ahead of its time. It didn't use trauma as some cheap plot point and puts you right inside that confusing, fractured, and beautiful headspace of its character. Maxx even had official team-ups with, drumroll, the Batman. When a character like the Maxx can share a page with Batman, that tells you just how much weight he carries in the comic world.
Save me. Say, kid. Crap. It was too late. You wanna go?
What could have been the Maxx's unfinished story? We've talked about how the cartoon just stopped. It ended around issue number 11 of the comic, which was a decent place to pause, but it left a ton of questions unanswered. The comic, though, it kept going. The first big storyline really wrapped up in issue number 20, giving fans a much more satisfying conclusion. We finally understood the suppressed memories connecting Julie and Dave, and they were finally starting to heal. But then years later, Sam Keith did something really wild. In the final issue, number 35, he gave the characters what he called proper closure. He had them all just vanish from that reality. They got to move on and start fresh, forgetting all the pain and shame of their past lives. It sounds kind of corny, but somehow he made it work. It was a radical ending, but Keith himself said he had to move on as a creator. He just wasn't the same person who started the comic, and he felt the characters had to move on too. It's funny when you look back at how the comic started in 1993. It felt like a very typical Image Comics book. For the time, you had a big Hulk-like hero, a cool damsel in distress, and a mysterious, magic-using villain. The Maxx even had that classic comic book amnesia. Let's be real, it was often a way for writers to figure out a character's origin later on. After a few issues with guest stars from other comics, the book started to change. It got weirder, it got sadder. It became less about punching bad guys, and more about regular people dealing with their lives and emotional problems. And yeah, some of the original fans who just wanted a cool monster hero probably dropped off. But for a lot of people, that's when the book got really interesting. And right around that time, the MTV show aired, bringing in a new audience that was totally ready. And you can't talk about the Maxx comic without talking about the letter section. It was called Maxx Tracks, and it was a huge deal. This wasn't just a couple of fan letters. It was a whole community. People would write in with their own theories about the story, share how it connected to their own lives, and even post their own art. Keith himself was super active in it, talking openly about his own struggles with the story. The comic became an interactive thing, like a group therapy session for the creator and the fans. It was something really special, and a huge part of what made the comic so much more than just a story on a page. It was a shared experience. So yeah, the cartoon is amazing, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. Marvelous verdict. So in the end, maybe the reason the Maxx still resonates so much is because it was never really finished. It's a flawed, yet still perfect piece of media. It's a shame we never got that second season, but what we did get was special. Maybe one day, they'll finally get the proper closure they deserve. But what do you guys think? Were you one of the lucky ones who caught this on MTV back in the day? Let us know your memories and your theories down in the comments.